Can you use contrast paints to paint Warhammer in the classic 90s style? Let's find out. My name's Guy, you're watching Midwinter Minis, and I'm just going to come right out and say it. I've been putting out some mixed messages about contrast paints on this channel. Way back when contrast paints were first released, I posted a video about why I wouldn't be using them on the channel. Fast forward 4 years and yeah, it's been 4 years, and I've used contrast paint, or similar types of one coat paint in quite a few videos. I even used them on my Golden Demon entry, and it got into the finals, so it can't have been that terrible. Honestly, I would still never use them as my paint of choice, but I can admit when I'm wrong, and for some applications, they're tough to beat. But can they be used to create that intensely vibrant retro Warhammer style? You know the one. Blue gradient backgrounds and Technicolor catalogues, nothing screams grimdark future like verdant green grass. On paper, the brighter, lighter coverage of many contrast paints might suit that retro painting style quite well, and speed up the process of painting larger armies, like the 20 Space Orks that come in the 2nd edition starter set. I've already rattled through most of this box, painting the Gretchen, the Space Wolves, the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels, just the Space Orks and the final squad of Blood Angels to go. Also, this video is kinda sponsored by Midwinter Minis, technically, but we'll talk about that later. And also, I've got a very, very cool competition to announce at the end of the video, so don't bail out early. Right then, let's start with the classic method to create a benchmark to judge the contrast version by. The first thing to do with these models is, as always, remove the mold lines. The lines on these boys are pretty intense, and took a lot of gentle knife scraping and filing to flatten out. Also, I'm still unpacking stuff from the studio and I couldn't find my drills, but the tip of a hobby knife can always do in a pinch. Just dot the center and gently spin it around until you get the desired barrel width. If there are any rough edges from the mold line removal, I find it really effective to gently brush those surfaces with Tamiya thin plastic cement. It comes with a brush which gently agitates those surfaces and helps the glue smoothen them out. Arm on, base on, a couple of random stones on the base, and then a coat of sand. Blue tack, plastic shot glass. I haven't found a cheaper, better mini handle yet, and I'm still using a pack of blue tack that I bought about 10 years ago. Right then, 2 identical, clean, tidy boys ready to be brought to life with a paintbrush. Model number 1 is going to be painted exclusively with OG Citadel white top hex pot paints from the mid-90s. And yes, by and large, they're still perfectly usable. Things were built different back then, let me tell you. The only exception is the white paint, which I just wasn't able to revive, so I'll use a modern white paint instead. First, I gave both models a spray of black all over. Not too heavy, just a dusting really, and mostly from the underside to try and get to all the hard to reach places and darken them down, and then I gave them a spray of white from above and from the sides. And after that, they look like this. First up, Chaos Black boots, pauldrons, and trim. These are Goffs after all. Next, blood red to paint the tassels, trousers, and the 2 horns at either side of the helmet. Bestial brown on the axe handle and snakebite leather on the little pouches on his belt. Chainmail on the axe blade, bolt pistol, and yep, again, these were bolt pistols. 2nd edition was really nice and simple, you only had to remember about 10 weapon profiles. The, let's be honest, rightfully venerated goblin green on the base, and also on the skin of the orc. Orcs, goblins, tomato, tomato. At this point, I went back in with some white to cut into the places I went over by mistake, ready for some checker patterns. I mixed in a bit of Chaos Black into the white to create some greys for the rocks on the bases. Man, it's looking great already. If I was just army painting to get stuff tabletop ready, I'd be super happy with this. But we can take it further. I darkened down the chainmail paint with a touch of black and gave the tips of the flak armor a little touch, trying not to go too far into the recesses. Getting a bit brighter and finer with each pass, up to eventually just painting pure chainmail on the tips. Looking at the photos in catalogues, 2nd edition orc skin was a little bit paler than I remember, so I just added a tiny bit of white to the goblin green and started adding soft highlights along the top facing side of prominent muscly bits. A little bit of texturing on the face and lips with a fine tipped brush, and a bit of brightness on his cheekbones. Next, I used the old orc flesh wash, which isn't really a wash in the modern sense because it's so potent and staining. I just use it with a precise brush to drop into the recesses around any bits I needed more shadow on, or definition from the surrounding elements. By the way, in case you're wondering why I personally collect Death Skulls and not Goffs, despite being an unashamed Goth myself, is that I've got green weak due to anomaly, which is a kind of colour blindness that makes green and red hard to differentiate. So a green and red army would be seriously hobbying on hard mode for me. Switching to Armour Wash, which is like Nuln Oil on steroids, I slathered it on the bolt pistol, the metal trim, the axe blade, and a little thin slightly into the creases of the flak armour. Right then, let's do the old red highlight trick. Red is a notoriously tricky colour to highlight when you want it to look both bold and bright in the mid-tone. Heavy metal painters in the 90s basically accepted the fact that you had to add white and made it look a bit pink, but then you pull out the old secret ingredient, red wash, or red ink really, to glaze over the pink highlighted areas. Pow! Intensified reds, and red spectrum highlights with a nice subtle look about them. Poop poop, all aboard the paint train. Let's paint on some tiny checkers. Annoyingly, there's no special trick to this. You just have to get the area you want to be checkers base coated white, and I'll quickly add some highlights to the metal with mithril silver and wait for the white to dry. Now back to the checkers. Just sketch on tiny black areas that vaguely look like squares, and then switch back and forth between black and white, tidying up the edges until you're satisfied with the shapes. A tiny bit of white into the black for some final boot and black armor highlights. Nothing too vibrant, we still want it to read as black after all. Tidying up the teeth and eyes with white, and then I toned them slightly with bleached bone. A tiny bit of white into the bestial brown to make a highlight colour for the wood, just to pick out some of that gorgeously hand-sculpted wood texture. And finally some sunburst yellow dry brushed onto the base to seal the deal. Tidy up the base rim. It's missing something. Yeah, that bone's not yellow enough. 90s Citadel Boney Bits had a really weirdly vibrant yellowy sepia tone in the shadows. Perfect. Okay, I'm happy with that. It certainly looks the part. It definitely wouldn't look out of place in the old catalogues, that's for sure. But this method of painting, with all its layering and intricacies, is quite time consuming. This model, even though it's just an orc boy, took me about 4 hours of hands-on painting, and I've got another 19 of them to do. At this rate, painting 20 orcs like this would take 2 weeks painting, as if it was your full-time job to finish. Now, let's see if contrast paint can be used to not only cut down the time, but also keep that retro vibe. Now, super quickly, before we do that, I just want to let you know that we've got some really awesome new art prints in production right now, hence the video technically being sponsored by us. We've got a vibrant, stylized reimagining of Hattie's Great Unclean Oogie Boogie made by the awesome artist Remouse. And there's also this totally epic artwork of the Midwinter Minis Warlord Titan retouched by Artists Empire. These are all high quality A3 art prints, but there's also a deluxe version of the Warlord Titan art, a giclée with 3 A4 replicas of my hand-drawn banners. They are almost done and will be shipping out worldwide. It's looking like next week. So go check out midwinterminis.com if you want to grab some for yourself. And now let's give the contrast method a go. To get the best out of contrast, you kind of need to apply a black wash all over the model. And then when that's dry, give the whole model a dry brush of white. This will leave darkness in the shadows and let the contrast paint's colour be most vibrant in the white areas. This cool monotone look is what you're after. Hexwraith Flame by itself is a little bit too transparent to make a good skin tone, so after a bit of experimentation I mixed a tiny bit of orc flesh and, I mean, yeah, that's okay. 2 coats will probably be better, but I don't hold out much hope for a nice coat on that base rim. Now, Baal Red is a great red paint, but it doesn't do much in the way of shading, so I mixed in a bit of Blood Angels Red with it to see if I can get the best of both worlds. Yeah, not bad. Let's do another coat with that green, and now Wildwood on the axe handle. Now switching to Black Legion on all of the armour, boots and trim. Same name, different paint, Snakebite Leather on the pouches. Now you might be thinking, how are you going to do the metallics with contrast, Guy? Well, fear not friend, the Army Painter have a pretty decent set of 3 metallics in their new Speed Paint 2 range. A coat of Broadsword Silver on the axe blade, bolt pistol, armour trim, and also on the flak armour should do the job. Let's add a little white into the green mix we used to create highlight colour for the skin. And now let's try a similar trick with the red highlights by adding white highlights over the red and then using thinned Baal Red contrast to tone those lightened areas. I mean, yeah, it kind of works. Time to tidy up some edges. teeth and eyes with some white, and then give those elements a gentle tone with some skeleton horde. I also mix some white into that skeleton horde to create a quick brown highlight colour for the axe handle. Some thinned Black Legion, almost to the consistency of Null Oil or something like that, just to add some shadows and tarnish to the axe blade, and some quick detail to the bolter and other metal bits. Now onto the checkers. Pretty much the same method as the traditional 90s paints, but using Black Legion instead of Chaos Black, so no big difference. Although I think my practice on the 90s paint version helped me a bit with the checkers here, as I think I was a bit more precise with these. Not necessarily to do with the paints, just probably getting a bit of practice in beforehand. So there we go, a very serviceable orc that took way less time, but realistically with all the extra highlights and layers to give it that 90s style, it still probably took almost 2 hours of hands-on painting time. The problem is, look at the difference using the old paints makes. It's literally like night and day. Maybe 90s goth orcs were a tough test for the contrast method, but even though the traditional method will obviously take at least twice as long, I reckon the difference is easily worth the extra time taken. Anyway, I need this dude to fit in with the rest of the army, so let's give him a proper goblin green base. Yeah, I mean, that helps for sure, but he seems a little bit too grimdark. A bit too contemporary for the 90s look. And that's fine, that's when these paints were designed and the look that they were made to achieve. Ultimately, I think this has maybe shown that while contrast paints do have their uses, there's no substitute for opaque, high pigment acrylics. And as I've shown in previous videos, it doesn't even have to be the rare, increasingly expensive 90s paints. You can achieve the same results with modern ranges too. Trying to achieve the 90s look with contrast paints is kinda doable, but it takes quite a lot of time to refine. Why not just use the old methods? Why bother struggling? I set out to see if I could batch paint these 20 orcs faster. Alas, no cutting corners for me. Experiment failed. Let me know what you think in the comments, and especially let me know what your favourite use of contrast paint is. I want to give everything a fair crack of the whip, and I know a lot of people swear by them. So, hey Guy, when are you painting the rest of those orcs? Well, I don't want to cover the same stuff over and over again here on YouTube, so I'll be streaming over on Twitch, painting the rest of these 90s orcs, chatting and hanging out with anyone who wants to join us. We've been streaming quite a bit recently actually, joined by Hattie and sometimes Steve, and it's been really nice so far. You should follow the link in the description and join us sometime. Right then, you've been so patient. You want to hear about that competition, huh? Unashamedly inspired by Darren Latham's recent 90s Marine Challenge, I want to get people inspired to try painting stuff in the retro Warhammer style. But as we'll be doing it in October, aka Orktober, we'll be doing orcs. Also, I don't want people to have to go out and buy really expensive rare models just to join in, so you can use any orc model that you like from any period, as long as it's painted in the retro style. Now, the jury's out. Is October Orktober or Spooktober? Why not both? Next week, I'm going to be doing a good old speed painting video covering some baddies from Hero Quest to inspire you for the spooky, undead side of things too. The competition will be judged by me, Hattie, Steve, and Ant, and yes, our favourite models from each category will get a prize. I'll be running the competition both on Instagram for everyone, and also on our Discord server just for our Patreon supporters. The prizes for our favourite retro orc paint job on Instagram will receive a super rare original metal Space Ork Raider model, and our favourite retro undead paint job will get a fantasy undead wraith model. Now things get a bit more serious for our Patreon supporters though. Our favourite retro style orc painted by one of our supporters will get this sensationally rare Space Ork sprue released in 1990. And our favourite undead retro paint job by a Patreon supporter will get this complete Warhammer Fantasy skeleton army. Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's why you should join our Patreon. It's only $2 a month. Don't post anything yet though, I'm just letting you know so you can start planning in your head. We'll be running the competition during October, so let your mind have an adventure and you'll hear more about it soon. But we can confirm the competition will be called not Orktober, not Spooktober, but Sporktober. Next time, Hero Quest. I'll catch you then. Bye for now.